Oh, hey, I didn't see you there. I was busy walking around my endless void. And based on the title I see down below my endless void, it seems like you're here to learn how to support your own 3D printed miniatures, so that they end up looking like that. Or having supports that look this good. Or maybe your minis keep failing and you just want a good time lapse that looks like this. Well, I can be your guy for that. I've got nothing better to do anyway. Let's move out of this endless void and into the magical world of computers. So I'm going to show you how to set up your supports for your 3D prints using Chitubox because it's a free program. There are many other programs, however I like using Chitubox because it pretty much comes with every printer that you want to use. Other ones require a subscription or a one-time service, and Chitubox just doesn't require that. The model that we'll be supporting and printing today is Alexei, the explosives expert from Print Minis, who is one of the sponsors of this video. Print Minis was awesome and provided this mini to me for free and to you for free, that way you can follow along this video and learn how to support in the same exact way that I'm going to show you. So since that's what we're going to be printing, let's go ahead and load it into Chitubox. You can either just drag the file straight in, or you could open it up from Chitubox. I'm going to do both because they actually have two versions, one that comes pre-supported versus one that has no supports on it at all. I'm just going to rotate it so that you can see a little bit more easily here. Okay, the comparison between the two models is pretty easy to see. This one has a bunch of things that will help it print more easily. One of the things that it does have is supports all over this bandolier. They kind of gave me a tough model to show off, but I think that's the best way to learn, is by trying something a little bit hard, but not something terribly impossible. I'm going to assume you have some sort of 3D printing knowledge already in terms of what it is, but if you don't, here is a very brief understanding of how a resin 3D printer works. Resin 3D printing works by creating hundreds of tiny layers of cured resin via UV lights. You can see here, this is the actual build plate in which the first bit of resin will be cured via UV lights. This is the first layer that you will see here. If you go to layer 1, this is the absolute first thing that will be printed, and essentially what happens is on this plate that's on your 3D printer, lights will shine right here where everything is green, and that will cure a layer of resin. That will stick to the build plate will move up, and then it will move back down into the position of layer 2. Once it's on that position, lights will turn on once more, and then it will cure another layer. That will go all the way up until you reach the top and you have a completed mini. Now, the reason we have to do supports like the one on this mini here to the right is because if you don't and you try and print something from thin air, like you see these little bandolier or grenade type things on the right side of this mini here, if I tried to just print those straight up, they have to print on nothing. So there's a good chance they just won't, because they're going to start printing right here where there's nothing, and now suddenly there is something around layer 445. Now, they don't have anything to stick to, so they may just have a bunch of light that shines and causes a blob of cured resin that will not do anything for you. By contrast, these ones already have supports on them, which are these big things here. They have something now to print on top of so that they're not hanging freely, and they can easily connect down to the bottom and go further from there. You can see why we need supports. Otherwise, things like these edges that just kind of hang off on their own really just won't print in resin prints. Now, you might be asking, a lot of programs have automatic supports, and honestly, a lot of people used to hate on those, and I still do, but they're not as bad as they used to be. So for example, I'm just going to go ahead and hit all for auto supports on this mini here, and you can see there's not too terribly much of a difference compared to this old one, though it does have thicker things here at the bottom. I would say that it has gotten far better than it used to be, but there's still a lot of things that it's going to miss that we can try and fix on our own. So instead of doing auto supports, instead I'm going to show you how to do all the supports you need to do on your own. Chitubox has also gotten a lot better than it was a year ago, and so all of this is going to be a lot easier to do. Now, we need to support this mini. Now, there's a few things we need to do before printing. You can print them straight up like this, and a lot of people do that, but it's always good to take your mini and rotate it just a little bit to make it so he leans back. Not a huge amount, just enough to where he looks like he's just kind of relaxing. That's pretty good for me. I don't want it to be flat on his back, but I also don't want it to be straight up. The reason we want to do this is because most things on the front of him now require essentially no supports to be done. These will all be built off of his back that slowly builds up, and that will prevent any sort of support lines or marks on the front to where we don't have to do really any support cleanup. I'm going to try and show you the best way to not have to do any support cleanup, but there always is some that needs to be done. And if we can avoid that, that's better. So we want to have him go on his back. So if there's any little marks from where we put the supports, they're going to be on the unimportant part instead of on the front where his face and his chest might be. Things that you're going to take immediate notice of on your Mini. If you care less about the front of your Mini and want their back to be pristine, I would say go ahead and do it the opposite way. But again, none of this is wholly required. So if we move up here to the top right of Chitubox, this is where we do our supporting. Whenever you click this, the Mini is going to be elevated by a small amount. That's determined by the Z-lift height. Now, Chitubox has a feature, as well as most of these slicing programs, where if you look at the bottom of your Mini, anything that's red is going to be something that's going to have some difficulty printing, and you probably want to have a support there. As we do more to this, that's not going to make the red go away. You'll just slowly gain an intuitive sense for what actually needs supporting. For example, this shoe here doesn't exactly have a lot of red compared to other things, but this is the bottommost part of the print. It actually is going to need a lot of support since everything is going to be dangled off from this. This Mini is going to hang as if he is upside down, so all of the weight of this Mini is going to be hung by the foot. Now there's a couple different types of supports we should talk about before we go into fixing them. There's a billion different ways to do supports. Everybody has their own philosophy. I am not a professional. I am a hobbyist, as I imagine you are. If you're a professional, you don't need my guide. So I'm going to tell you what works best for me, and I really suggest that you experiment and find out what works best for you. There are 3 different types of supports: light, medium, and heavy. They differ pretty greatly in the base function of Chitubox, but I've set them up to where they're not all that different because really, if you can tune your printer in well, they shouldn't be all that different. A light support is obviously going to be smaller or lighter, a medium support will be a little bit thicker, and a heavy support will be the heaviest of them. You can see the difference here as I've placed them on the Mini. I've created kind of my own custom setup for all of these different supports. If you want to follow what I use, go ahead and do so. However, recognize that I'm going to be printing on an Elegoo Mars 2, so my resolution is a little bit better than a typical Elegoo Mars or any of the other kind of baseline resin printers. That being said, I don't change that much between using an Elegoo Mars 2 and an Elegoo Mars Pro or Elegoo Mars 1. The only thing that I change is the contact diameter. Because the resolution is a little bit better on my Elegoo Mars 2, I changed the contact diameter and contact depth to 0.2 if I'm using an Elegoo Mars 1 or an Elegoo Mars Pro. But since I'm going to be using an Elegoo Mars 2, I'm going to leave my light supports at a 0.1. So why might somebody use a light, a medium, or a heavy support? Generally, you want to use a heavy support if it has to carry a lot of weight. For example, down here at the bottom of his boots, I probably will do a heavy support for a couple of reasons. Heavy supports generally hold a lot of weight better than medium or light, but again, that's all just changed in preference here. The reason I want to use heavy at the bottom is because this has to hold the entire weight of the Mini. The reason I want to use heavy supports on these boots is because the bottom of these boots is going to hold the rest of the weight of the Mini. So I think it's very important that there's something heavy to hold up the Mini. I will probably not use medium at all for this, however that may change as I get going, and I will use light pretty much everywhere else. The reason I will use light pretty much everywhere else is you can see how little of the Mini this light actually is going to affect. If I'm using a heavy part, that means there's a lot of support that's touching the Mini, and when I break these off, there's going to be a lot of marred or scratched up surface area from removing the support. You can see I have very, very tiny contact and contact depth diameters here, so hopefully this will basically just peel off if I blow on it hard. Obviously that's hyperbole, but that would be amazing if we could get that far, so that's what we're going to go for. I'd rather over support with light that are easy to remove than under support with heavy that I have to do a lot of work in the end to fix. So I'm going to remove these supports and let's get started. So let's do most of the heavy lifting that we have to do here and now. Like I said, this is going to be held up from the bottom, so the first thing that I'm going to do is place some heavy supports right on the boot here. Whenever you place a support, you can see where the supports are actually going to be and what's going to be printed, and if you don't like how that turns out, that's your own fault. All you gotta do is edit it. This button's kind of spooky, and I didn't do it for a long time, but it's really easy to change around. Moving this little edit support thing here changes where the outline of the support is going to be, and you can see exactly where things are going to line up. That's where I'm placing the first heavy support. I don't want it to go outside of the boot to where whenever I pull this off, it's actually going to remove part of the boot, so I want it to be right there, right along the edge of the heel, and that should hold everything just fine. I'm going to put extra of these on the heavy parts of the boot just because, again, this has to hold the rest of the figure up. That should be good enough to hold the Mini and the rest of the weight. These things stick pretty good to the build surface, and this honestly isn't a very thick Mini. Now, that should be all the heavy supporting I need to do. We can always add heavy supports, which is a technique I like to do later, and I'll show you what I mean by that. What we really need to be looking for now are islands. Islands are where these little black lines are. These are each of the layers going up and down this Mini. If you ever find a part where there is no circle or there is no ring in which this is connected to, that's called an island. For example, around his leg here, these are not islands because there's something on the inside and out. However, each of these little bullet ends here, these are islands. The further I get away, it's not an island. This part where it's all black, that means that is an island. So this little bandolier or reloading set of bullets is going to have a lot of islands. Let's see how we can fix that. So let's go ahead and start there. That's a great place for us to learn because this is a hard thing that needs a lot of supports. So we're going to find every island on one of these bullets and just go ahead and click our way through so that way we have something that supports it. Here is a tricky island. See, if I go under here, Chitubox wants it to be held up by this other bandolier. That would be good. It would hold this up and make sure that it gets printed, but then I'd have to cut this out, and I'm not really confident in my abilities to cut this small bit of support out without breaking or damaging some of this bandolier. So the better thing to do is to create this support here, go in, and then edit it so that it supports the island that you want it to support. And if you're worried that that support's not going to go well, who cares? Just go ahead and support your own support. That's the easiest way to do things like that. Boom, now that support is held up even better. Now we have just a bit of editing to do to make sure that we are both supporting these islands and not touching any of the other bandoliers. See, this is an issue what I've done here. I'm going to go ahead and move this ball up. We don't want anything getting too close to these other little bandolier parts or else they're also going to have issues printing. So if you feel like you've got some issues, you can move the ball up, or if you touch the base, you can actually move the whole bottom of the support too. We want a decent amount of clearance or else there's going to be issues, and we just don't want those. Boom, now there shouldn't be any issues where these are getting printed. Now we have the majority of the bandolier supported, and I think it looks pretty good. We can edit a few things if we really wanted to fine tune it here, but I think that's good enough. So we can do one of a few things. We can either call this good, or when I use light supports like this, if there's nothing connecting or holding them, I do get a little bit worried, so sometimes I place other light supports that will connect in and up along these other ones. This will make sure whatever you print isn't going to have any issues down the road and that these light supports themselves aren't going to fail. Again, over supporting way better than under supporting. There, I don't think any of that is going to have a problem. And I think all of this is going to print pretty well. Now we want to do the same thing on every other part of the body. You can see there is an island in a very awful location for this man, but hey, that's where we need to put the support, so that's where I'm going to put it. I'd rather have a bunch of smaller supports sporadically placed than a heavy support. For example, here's another island. We want to try and make sure every island on this piece is taken care of by at least one small support. So that's basically it. I'm going to find anywhere that there's an island or any large patch of red, because any large patch of red means that's kind of a heavy angle and it should use some supporting. I'm moving away from the bottom part now, which has what I think is enough supports. You can see, again, I had to do hardly any supports on the front because there's just hardly anything red. There's a few here that I probably could add something to, but again, I'm not too worried about things on this side. Now, say there is something that needs to be supported like this part of the gun here, but you just have to do something that connects to the Mini. Well, you could do that, or what I generally like to do is move this part of the support way out here to where the bottom will actually move off of that support. And honestly, by all accounts, this is done. This is fine supporting here. This will hold up your Mini and have no issues. By comparison, you can see these supports that are made by their professional ones are much more sturdy, and there's no way that these are going to be failed on their supports. And they have very tiny tips, and there's ways you could go about remedying those. But honestly, this should do the job. What I like to do to make sure it does the job is do a little bit more supporting of the supports. This probably took a professional supporter somewhere between 3 or 4 hours, where this took me, I would say, the better part of 15 minutes. If we can get the job done at this level and now go back in and support the supports, I would say that that's good because my supporting the supports takes no effort at all. I go in with a bunch of just small, light supports connecting all of the other ones, basically making sure that all of these pieces here have something to build up in on their own. And then afterwards, I'll take a few heavy supports and just connect them up to some of the lighter parts so that there really is a build place for all of these to connect to and that there's no way that any of these are going to have any fails, even on the light and thinnest part of the supports. So there we go. I would say that this is a completed and supported model. I will print both of these to test the difference and see what a professionally supported one looks like versus my hobby one, as well as to see which one is easier to remove. But there's going to be a second video or a follow-up one to this one that shows the easiest way to remove these type of supports and do follow-up care for your minis. For now, let's take a look at the print settings that I'm going to be using. I have a couple of different print settings depending on what I'm using. These are my settings for my Elegoo Mars 2, and these are my settings for my Elegoo Mars Pro. If I was going to show you a regular Elegoo Mars, all I would do is change my exposure time from 7 seconds to somewhere around 9 or 10 seconds. These settings would of course change depending on what resin I'm using. For example, if I was using a Merilabs, I might even be able to change the exposure time down to 4 seconds, but since I'm going to be using the base Elegoo Mars resin, I'll leave it at 6 seconds and I should be good to go. Now, Print Minis provided me with 2 minis to show off during this tutorial. That first one was that Alexei, and this one is the Diesel Trooper Heavy Gunner. They also have a pre-supported version of this mini, and I'm going to go ahead and do a time-lapse of me supporting this Heavy Gunner. While you're watching this time-lapse, I want to say a thank you to the 2 sponsors of this video, My Mini Factory and Print Minis. If you want to get these 2 minis that I'm using in this video, you can go check out the My Mini Factory Print Minis webpage and download them for free. There's a bajillion other minis you can check out on the My Mini Factory web store. That's pretty much what they do, and you should also check out the Print Minis Patreon page. They come out with a bunch of new sci-fi themed minis every month, and each mini actually has a running story going with it. So if you want to see the story for the Alexei mini that we supported, I'll put that in the description down below. And so there you have it, 2 completely different prints done both in my way and in the professionally supported ways. I'm going to go ahead and set this up to where I can set these on my printer and get them going, and we can take a look at what those look like and make sure that the supports come off properly. And as those are printing, I do want to tell you about something cool that we're doing to go along with this video. On May 26 over on my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Rybonator, I'm going to be supporting these again and a couple of other minis live. That way, if you want to support along with me or come ask me questions live, you can do that. I'll be doing that this Wednesday again, May 26th, with these minis, and since they're available for free, you can go along supporting the exact same minis and ask me any questions you want to. Thank you so much for watching. Next week, we're going to have a follow-up video that is basically all the stuff you do after you support a mini, like how you get it off of the print bed and what you're supposed to do to cure your mini. So subscribe to make sure you don't miss that. Like the video if you like it, dislike it if you disliked it, and either way, I will see you on Wednesday for the live stream. I hope that you have a fantastic day.